interesting things about Australian newspapers. So that's a huge whole other area, but all these newspapers also are constantly discussing entertainment behind the lines. And of course, a major feature of entertainment behind the lines is theater. And of course, theaters have female roles. And of course, in all those armies, those roles are taken by men, as in Shakespeare, classically in Shakespeare. What happens over the course of the war is that in the German newspapers, you do see some photographs of the female impersonators, definitely in a positive manner, of one of our greatest actresses. In the French side, it goes a little bit further in terms of some love letters that appear, of soldiers writing love letters to those impersonators. The British take this much further, but no one takes it as far as the Australians. In the Australians, they have long articles about the huge ballroom dances, where half the men were in drag and half weren't, and everyone danced all night together. Fist fights over female impersonators among Australian soldiers. So, I want to go to Canberra. I think there's really interesting stuff to do on not only the very different national character of Australians in terms of this radical insubordination, which was a stereotype and is absolutely a true stereotype in the newspapers, but also this much more radical openness about this kind of element of army life, which is so much more than the other newspapers. So the Canberra archives, there's a sabbatical there somehow.
Do you have any sense of what the average soldier in the trenches thought of these newspapers? I mean, the little bit that I read, there's this feeling the generals are idiots, the war is terrible. Do you get any sense that they think that these newspapers are just junk?
No. I don't have any evidence. All we have is the evidence that they were incredibly popular. There isn't praise at all of generals in any of these newspapers. That's not there. There isn't any hint that war is a good thing in any of these newspapers, including the German. There's no positive depiction of war. And to go the line of what you're suggesting then is going too far. But even from soldier letters, we know that the vast majority, I mean, this idea that this is all complete BS and why are we here and we hate the officers is ultimately a small portion of soldiers. The average soldiers from soldier letters are very much, I'm here, I have to be here, this sucks, but I'm going to get through it. Much more of that kind of sentiment, which turns out is much more typical of a soldier sentiment in any war, as far as I can tell. So no, but not a praising of any of this at all.
Thank you.
Was there any kind of a Bernie Pyle style correspondence of being the soldiers' view to back home? Or to the other soldiers?
I don't know. I mean, I've never done domestic newspapers on the home front. And I don't know. You mean stuff that would appear in home front newspapers?
Well, that or even in the soldiers' newspapers.
No advice. Yeah, some. Actually, funny. There are some advice columns that appear. Some of which could be pretty drastic. I remember in one Canadian newspaper, they were talking about the bird, the snipe. So a snipe is a kind of bird, and the advice was, what do you do when you find a snipe? Kill it. Snipers. Right? So it's kind of really, I mean, it was total episode of practice in the First World War. You killed snipers, and so little kind of advice columns like that. Okay, no, I can't think of it as being some kind of typical.
Curious about the German newspapers. Are there any sort of regional differences between Bavarian unit newspapers and their Prussian counterparts?
Again, so there were these Bavarian armies. So there are distinct regional, unlike the French and the British. No, that's not true. There are the Welsh and there are Scottish and there are Irish as well. French are the only ones who pretend they're all unified. But the Germans had to be careful again along the same lines of the domestic truce. There are very occasionally some regional jokes. Okay, so the Bavarian newspapers will put sometimes a joke or even a whole article in Bavarian dialect is a way to identify. Very rarely there'll be a reference to like a fight between a Prussian and a Bavarian. Very rarely they'll allow that kind of thing. But really, the whole idea that there are regional differences in Germany is skated over in the same way that domestic political problems are skated over and not really allowed to be discussed. And that would be the same in the British newspapers. I don't remember any kind of making fun of Irish or Scottish or English in the newspaper. It's a reference that they exist, and again, slang will be used, but no kind of, we actually hate each other and are fighting alongside each other. That doesn't exist in any of the newspapers.
Did you get a feeling through reading the German newspapers that due to like the geographic separation between Germany and the Eastern Front, as well as the difference in languages, did you get a feeling by reading that if they did refer to the people on the other side of the line, that there was a sense of inferiority, like they are somewhat lesser?
Profoundly. On the Western Front and the Eastern Front, the Germans clearly think they're better than the people they're occupying. But there are differences. So the French are dirty, and the French are superficial. I mean, this classic idea that Germany sees French civilization as thin and underneath pretty ugly. There are several depictions of, first of all, German women who wake up in the morning looking fantastic and go through the day looking fantastic, whereas the French women that we see in the streets of Lille, here's a sketch of what they looked like when they woke up before they put on their superficial level of beauty. That's directly in there, that French women are ugly until they make themselves look beautiful to us. Okay? France is somewhat backward. We will bring more order to these little bit dirty villages that we're in. Totally different. On the Eastern Front, in one story that had strong racialized elements to it, couple soldiers stay in a farm, in a Polish farm, so way out eastern Poland, basically Belarus today. They're staying in a farmhouse, and they think that the Polish girl who's milking the cows, she must be from Africa. She's so dark. And then they clue in to what's happened here, and they go down and they show her, you should come over here to this clean water, and you should wash your face. And she did, and she realized that, it's nice to, and she was white, a white Polish woman underneath this. I mean, that kind of level of, we're in deepest Africa here in the East. These people with German know-how, clean water, we can remove this layer of dirt from the East and raise these people. I mean, to those who don't know in this room, the director of the Institute here, Vas, is the person who began seeing the Eastern Front as a fundamental part of the First World War. I was in Jay Winter's office. I love this little story. I arrived for my first day in Cambridge in Jay Winter's office, and I'm sitting there talking to Jay Winter, and he says, that stack of paper on the ground by your feet just arrived. I think it's going to change the way we write about World War I. I'd like you to take it home and read it. It was Vas's manuscript he just sent to Jay Winter for the Cambridge University Press series. And Jay Winter was right. He changed the way we do World War I history now. So, all of that is absolutely there, and this whole idea, on the Western Front, we're comradely, good gentlemen who are going to somewhat help out the French. That is everywhere in the East. This place is a backwards wasteland without us, and constant discussions of the local people and the history and how our role here is so much more than even a war of defense. Yes, we're defending Germany against the Russians in the future, but we're also actually bringing incredible civilization to these natives. It's absolutely replete in the Eastern Front.
I'll ask
another one if I can. I'm curious about soldiers' perceptions of aviators during this time period, because I know some of them get made out to be pretty pop culture figures. So are these papers, is there anything in there about them?
Yeah, the stereotype is true. There is one hero in World War I. There is one knight, and it is the single aviator in the single piloted plane, the Knights of the Sky. They love these guys. All 3 newspapers write about these guys. They're sitting down there in the trenches, can't do anything, and these guys are up there jousting on their white horses. Like, it's all the language is there of these are medieval heroes. And when they die, the whole front page of the newspaper is a monument, like you see kind of a fallen eagle on the ground, and the name of the fallen pilot. They worship these guys. The British, like everything, had some fun at their expense because they would depict them as these incredible toffs. Like just, monocle, just super elite, posh guys that were, immaculate and didn't know how to lift a shovel or anything like this. So the British had fun, but clearly idolized these guys. So that is absolutely true. They're the one hero in the whole thing. That stereotype holds up in these papers.
Why don't you please join me in thanking Professor Nelson for a most stimulating talk. Thanks very much. Please pick up some of our literature, and if you're not on our